join us.
Ma non cane dice come tengo, ma non mi rannudo che io dico. Le vai su, tu dice le vai. Io no, ma non mi si dire niente. I don't know. Siamo alle vai. Cercano un capito.
Hi, Jackie. It's Brenda. How are you?
Ma ne dice mi su ide solo che ha fatto tutto cosa, no? Usciamo tu, sai? Siamo alle vai. E brillante le vai.
Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes to allow some more people to join. Maybe we'll start at 10:05.
Okay, I'll let you go. We're about to end, so take care. Okay, bueno. Bro.
All right, let's get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Taylor, and I am an MSW student doing my placement at Asset Group and working with Miss Nicole Perryman. Also joining me on this for this presentation is Sophia, my colleague who is also doing her MSW and doing our placement with Miss Nicole Perryman. So we have a jam-packed 2 hours for you folks, so I don't want to waste any time. So to start, we will begin this presentation by acknowledging that we are meeting on Aboriginal land that has been inhabited by Indigenous people from the beginning. As settlers, we're grateful for the opportunity to meet here, and we thank all the generations of people who have been taking care of this land for thousands of years. Long before today, as we gather here, there have been Aboriginal people who have been stewards of this place. And in particular, we acknowledge the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. We recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connection to this place. We also recognize the contributions of Métis, Inuit, and other Indigenous peoples have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community in particular, and our province and country as a whole. As settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous people must also be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real in our communities, and in particular, to bring justice for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls across our country. So today's presentation is going to focus on the following topics. So we're going to talk a little bit about emotions and behavior, and then go into some distress intolerance. Then we're going to talk about technology and devices, the use of physical punishment. We'll finally finish it off with talking about vicarious trauma and advocacy. So to start off, talking about emotions and behaviors, from the start, we know that growing up looks different for different children. And so some children are provided with plenty of opportunities that can put them on track for success, while other children are pulled off track by experiences that affect their ability to learn and flourish, such as like the experience of being in the child welfare system. And so if you see this graphic here, I think a lot of people see the first two images and not often the third. And so this is kind of equality in the first one. Everyone has the same, but as you can see, not everyone can see the game. And then equity is making sure that everybody is being treated the same and they have the same equal access. But then in the third image, we can see that the barriers were removed. So there are no boxes needed. And that kind of goes into like justice and actual inequities addressed. And so when we think of development, neuroscience teaches us that the early experiences of young children have a tremendous influence on their developing brains. And so in children that are experiencing healthy emotional and cognitive development, they are typically more responsive, have dependable interactions with adults. So just growing up very ordinary in the sense that they haven't had major challenges. But on the other hand, children that may have had experiences that shaped them to have unhealthy emotional and cognitive development may result in chronic or extreme adversity, such as poverty, caregiver substance abuse or mental illness, exposure to violence, family hardship without appropriate adult support. And as well, this can cause excessive amounts of the cortisol hormone, so the stress hormone, to be produced, which disrupts developing brain circuits and affects the body in a lot of other different ways. And so this prolonged activation of the stress response system can not only disrupt brain architecture and the way that it's developing and organ systems, but it also increases the risk of stress-related diseases and cognitive impairment well into the adult years. So repressed emotions are another aspect that can be hard to cope with as a foster parent. This happens because children may have awareness and know that they lost their family, and so their need for survival is stronger. And especially because it's the parts of the brain that focus on survival, these parts may be overactivated. And so it's important to remember that emotions that are repressed have a purpose, and what gets repressed must get expressed. And so this results in, and sometimes we see this with children that are acting out certain behaviors that may be viewed as like disobedient or rebellious. And so, for example, if a child often steals, it calls to question, where's the stealing coming from? And so ultimately, stealing in that case um, is serving an unmet need. So potentially something has been taken from them. It's taking something to fill the emptiness and the loss. So anger. Anger is often a secondary emotion. And so we experience anger often when there's an underlying emotion kind of being felt, but being maybe pushed back. So for example, like sadness, shame, fear. And so anger, it's such an important emotion, and it tells us like when we don't like something, when something isn't right, or if we need to do something different to meet our needs. And so it's really important to look into emotion behind anger, as it can often lead us to the need that is unmet. So for example, if shame is that underlying emotion and it's coming out in anger, then the child may need to be reassured and validated in order to feel better. And so as you're aware, caregivers can also face emotional challenges, and especially if they're burnt out, tired, or feeling unsupported. But sometimes we can, without knowing or being aware of it, transfer those emotions and let them out onto the child, especially in a situation where the child may not be following instructions or meeting expectations. And so when this happens, it can be easy to see the child's behavior as the problem. But at the same time, there may be a need behind that parenting, whether that need is respect. So feeling like you aren't getting the level of respect from the child that you deserve, or maybe appreciation. So feeling unappreciated and like your hard work is going unrecognized. Oh, pardon me, I'm just gonna let someone in. Perfect. And just a reminder to please I can speak, mute your microphones if you don't mind. That would be super helpful. So, as we'll touch on in a bit, emotions and feelings are so valid, and it is okay to feel hurt, disrespected, or unappreciated. But at the same time, it's important to recognize when these emotions may be impacting us in the ways in which we respond. And so the need you're experiencing does not take away from their need for you to help them deal with their behavior. And so a way to mitigate this might be to say, I don't appreciate being spoken to like that, but I can tell that you feel this is unfair. Do you want to talk about it? I'm here to listen. And so looking at some tools for communicating with children, because sometimes it can be hard to keep our emotions in check. And so one way is to lower your physical body. And so bend down, sit down, lower yourself to that child's level. So it kind of reduces a little bit of that power imbalance. And that's supposed to say, take a deep breath. Take a big breath and let it out and just allow it to calm yourself down. Soften and relax your face. So this is used to ease the child's reaction because children watch us and look for signals of safety or threat. And so as you can see at this graphic, sometimes what an angry child needs to hear is, I care about how you feel. I will stay with you. I'm here for you. And statements such as that. Other ways that may be helpful include using a neutral tone. And I know this is really, it can be really hard, especially when our emotions are high. And another thing is acknowledging what the child did right. So saying like, I noticed you tried something and I honor what you contributed to the situation. And so it can be frustrating and difficult as a parent having your child cry. And the initial reaction to their emotions may be to shut them down and tell them to put the tears away. And though this response is well intentioned, it might be more helpful to acknowledge the emotion and normalize it, as we all cry from time to time, even in adulthood. And so some things to say instead of stop crying are, it's okay to be sad. This is really hard for you. I'm here with you. Tell me about it. I hear you. That was really scary, sad, etc. I will help you work it out. I'm listening. I hear that you need space. I'll stay close so you can find me when you're ready. And it doesn't feel fair. So these statements are kind of more validating and reassuring and can sometimes be more productive than just saying, stop crying. And so parallel play might be something that you're familiar with, and basically it consists of two children playing side by side but separately, so not influencing each other's behavior and just kind of doing their own thing. Sorry. So parallel play can be amended to allow for parents and the child to play alongside each other. And this strategy can be used to model healthy behavior and practices for the child and can allow you to connect with them without necessarily forcing interaction. And so parallel play can make it a safe space for children to connect who may be resistant, as play can be comforting and familiar. And so by doing an activity beside them, like playing or walking the dog, it can help bridge the gap in closeness and foster connection. And so now we're going to talk about exposure to racism, which is a really important topic. So when looking at children's exposure to racism, this exposure and experiencing microaggressions, which are words or actions that subtly convey prejudice, this is a stressor that increases vulnerability to anxiety and depression, and particularly if that bias is being internalized. And so, just let someone else in. And so not only that, but children that face these microaggressions are also faced with the burden of calling out discrimination, which speaks to so many other issues, such as people not taking their concerns seriously, feeling dismissed, and having to go through the emotional labor of explaining and rehashing their experience. Microaggressions also look like folks experiencing questions and comments such as, did you grow up with a father in your life? Or I have Black friends, I don't see color. And I think a larger issue is that many people don't realize the impact that their words or actions have, or just are really misinformed. And so, for example, I was talking to my mom a couple years ago, and she said that she was raised to not see color and just treat everyone the same. And at this point, I shared that it's more that we do see color and acknowledge Black identity, because being not conscious of race means ignoring racism and being complicit in it. And I feel like, yeah, my mom was kind of blown away, like, whoa, I never knew that. And then she was like, this is why your generation's changing the world. So, not to critique my mom, I love her very much. But at the same time, it's really not the job of racialized people to educate white people on how to be anti-racist. It's something that, they have to take the initiative. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't recognize the need. And then another thing that's really important to mention is that in school, medical conditions such as ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, or racial trauma are mistakenly viewed as criminal behavior by school staff. And so exposure to police violence, racial profiling, it increases the likelihood of children suffering from toxic stress. And so not only that, but racialized children are less likely to receive appropriate help. And when they do, they're often met with hostile responses to their behaviors, despite those behaviors being associated with and related to the trauma that they experience. And so I really, really like this graphic that a colleague of mine presented. It states that trauma is commonly misdiagnosed as ADHD in children. And so you can see on the left side trauma, on the right side ADHD, and there's so many overlaps, those distractible, disorganized, kind of restless, impulsivity, the difficulty learning, difficulty sleeping. And though this is often seen as something that, it's their attention, oftentimes they don't look at the underlying, trauma that is going on that causes them to have that, constantly being on edge or zoning out and dissociating. Avoidance of reminders of the trauma might look like not wanting to go to school or not wanting to leave bed, like stuff like that. There's a lot of overlap, and I think it's we're very quick to go to like the diagnostics of ADHD or oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, but sometimes it's really helpful to actually look at the experiences of the child and to see, did you have any potentially traumatic experiences, whether those are, large sort of traumas or, a collective mini traumas in a way, like little traumas. It's still really important to acknowledge that and recognize that to avoid pathologizing children. And so teaching children to resist bias, it's to help children resist the bias that are prevalent in society. They can teach children how to interact fairly with different types of people. As well, we could model positive and healthy behavior by facing our own biased attitudes. So recognizing when we are biased or prejudiced, acknowledging it and reframing it. We can talk positively about each child's physical characteristics and cultural heritage and emphasize uniqueness and difference, and let children know that unjust things can be changed. So whether that's going through and talking about some historical events that have happened, or just letting them know that there is hope. And another thing that can be really helpful is involve children in taking action on issues that are relevant to them. And so this can help them have a sense of agency and mastery, like they are, they're contributing to help make the world a better place. And so Angela Quijada Banks has a podcast and a book as well. So I just wanted to highlight these for any racialized children that might be needing some representation, whether that's, via a podcast or a book. So the Black Foster Youth Handbook could be helpful as well, or Soulful Liberation, where Angela talks about childhood trauma, feelings of being alone, and in foster care. And so this is kind of to help liberate your soul. And I really love this quote by Audre Lorde. It says, "I have come to believe over and over again that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal, and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood." And so I really like this quote because, you can't fight injustice if it's not acknowledged and if it's being denied, And so, And so now I have a case study here. And so Janine is an 8-year-old foster child experiencing tantrums and bursts of anger, especially at nighttime. And this has been going on for years, despite the fact that her family thought, maybe she'll grow out of it. And so, what might the parents feel in these moments when she expresses her anger? And what steps or tools or actions might be helpful to support Janine? And so, if anyone wants to share, feel free to go ahead. Or does anyone have any thoughts on, children that are experiencing anger or experience with that and want to share something that helped them or something that they wish they known?
Hello,
Okay.
this is Brenda.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, just since she's mostly tantruming and at nighttime, I would start questioning, you know, if this is, if it's a trigger for her, perhaps she was sexually abused. It's really the key is to really understand, like you said earlier, what's causing the anger. Maybe she needs a nightlight or something, you just got to figure out what's going on with her at close to bedtime.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Definitely kind of exploring what's going on for her, trying to open up the dialogue and make sure she feels sharing or feels comfortable sharing. Definitely a nightlight might be a good idea if it's like a dark issue or a nighttime thing. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Does anyone else have any thoughts? All right, no worries. I will move on. And so now we're going to be talking about distress and distress intolerance. And so, as we kind of talked about, children may not have the regulatory capacity to say what they're feeling and thinking. And so they may have maladaptive or, unhealthy behaviors because they didn't know how to cope any other way, just like the example earlier where a child was stealing. So unfortunately, society's reaction to traumatized people is that, bad things happen to those who deserve them, which is so problematic and not true at all. And this is seen in, for example, rape culture and other things like that. And so when we experience emotional discomfort, we, oh, sorry, what is distress tolerance? It's important to talk about distress. And so all humans experience a large range of emotions, and some emotions may feel more comfortable, where some may feel really uncomfortable. And so the sad is emotions that reflect sadness at varying degrees of intensity. So, like disappointment, hurt, despair, grief, shame, all of those things. And then the mad, these emotions reflect anger. So these feelings are like frustration, disgust, anger, rage, hatred. And the scared, this group describes emotions like nervousness, anxiety, fear, dread, panic, and terror. And so when we experience emotional discomfort, we may evaluate it negatively. And some common beliefs or statements that are kind of thought or said is like, I can't stand this. I hate this feeling. Like, I can't deal with this in this moment. And that's what distress intolerance is when they feel that they're unable to cope with their emotions, they try and escape it or avoid it. And so, how does distress intolerance develop? Well, it's likely a combination of biological and environmental factors that leads some people to be more intolerant of emotional distress than others. And so there's some suggestion that some people are biologically more sensitive to negative emotions, um, or experience them more easily, at more intensity, or for a longer duration. And this means that some people experience negative emotions as more painful, and hence they would have greater difficulty coping. And so it's likely that our experiences growing up through childhood, through adolescence, and through our adult life, they shape how we deal with emotions. And so some people may not have been shown the ways to tolerate emotional discomfort appropriately. Maybe, for example, being punished for expressing emotions like crying when they're sad. Um, so I really like this quote by Kristen Neff. She focuses on self-compassion. So I'll just read it out. It says, pain and dysfunction get passed down from generation to generation. A mixture of genetic inheritance and environmental circumstance ensures that our lives unfold according to a complex web of conditions that is infinitely larger than ourselves. The only way to stop the vicious cycle of reacting to pain by causing more pain is to step out of the system. We need to let our hearts fill with compassion and forgive ourselves and others. So I just really like that quote.
Yeah, I do too.
Mm-hmm. And so the problem with the distress intolerance is it's makes a lot of sense to get away from things that feel unpleasant. You know, this strategy seems to work for things like heat, cold, pain, hunger. But unfortunately, sometimes when we apply that same strategy to our emotions, it can backfire. And so two ways that this might be done is through avoidance and numbing and withdrawing. So unlike distraction, which is kind of more so setting those worries and thoughts aside until you can deal with them productively, avoidance is more of an escape method that can take on different forms. So, I'm often guilty of excessive mindless social media scrolling. And, I'll be on Instagram and realize half an hour has passed. So stuff like that, and just engaging in these behaviors that make us feel good in the short term, but not in the long term. And so while often numbing withdrawing are used to turn out uncomfortable emotions, so for example, excessive sleep and binge eating, and it's important to recognize the more that we fear and struggle with and avoid this distress, generally the worse this distress gets. If someone tells you don't think of a polar bear, obviously you're going to think of a polar bear right away. So the more that we fear and struggle with and avoid this distress, then it can actually amplify it. And so to deal with emotions, suppression is kind of pushing those emotions down. So, hiding it inside, putting on that mask, pretending that everything's okay. And often with this, there's no opportunity to get support because folks often don't realize that you're struggling. And there's no relief through emotional expression because of that mask, because you're trying so hard to make it look like you're okay. And this also increases feelings of shame. And then on the opposite side of that spectrum is flooding. And so that's when your emotions are tending to take over and all you can feel is that emotion. It's overwhelming. You feel out of control, and you feel like maybe people are going to turn away because you're too much. You're too much of a burden. Your emotions are too heavy, and no one wants to deal with that. Some thoughts like that, and it also increases feelings of shame. So what can be done to help? Well, there are emotional regulation and mindfulness skills that can be used to help. And so one that I feel is pretty easy to remember is observe, describe, and participate. And so really it's just observing the moment that you are in when you're feeling that really heavy emotion, and then describing to yourself what you're experiencing. So for example, I am right now, I just got a really bad text message and I'm experiencing a lot of panic, a lot of fear, anxiety. And then participate is kind of participating in the moment and being involved in whatever you're doing. And so, if you're in front of your computer, just like kind of taking a step and being like, Okay, deep breath. I'm here, I'm in the moment. I'm just going to focus on what I can. And sometimes this can help regulate our emotions and help us feel grounded. And we'll talk about grounding a bit later. And another acronym that we can use is SNACK. And so SNACK stands for stop, notice, accept, curious, and kindness. And so stop, when you feel those heavy emotions, kind of just stop what you're doing and allowing yourself to exist and notice what's going on within you. So for example, if you did get that text message, you're feeling a lot of panic and fear, notice that. So notice my heart's racing. I'm short of breath. I feel butterflies in my stomach. And just notice and not pass judgment. So instead of saying like, wow, I'm a stupid person because I'm dealing with this, it's just saying, no, I'm dealing with this and it's okay. And accepting, it's a tricky one, right? So whenever you're struggling with something, it's accepting is acknowledging it without that judgment and not being hard on yourself. And so curious is kind of finding out maybe what's been going on, kind of asking yourself those questions like, how was my day? What happened in my day that contributed to this? Maybe I wasn't in a strong, healthy mindset beforehand, so that text kind of just threw me off. It's kind of like being like your own little investigator and asking, what do I need? How do I balance myself out? What's not helping? What can help? What have I done in the past when I felt like this? And the last one is kindness. And so I think this is really important. We're often so hard on ourselves, and it's really easy to say things that we don't like about ourselves or say like, oh, I'm so dumb or whatever. But it's really hard to speak kindly to ourselves. And so I think it's important to respond to ourselves with kindness, to speak to ourselves the way that we would speak to someone that we love. And so if you're really struggling with that, you can just pretend like it's a loved one in the situation that you're coping with and you're trying to help them. Whatever you would say to them, try and say to yourself. And so hopefully this video works. But this is Kristen Neff. I love her so much.
Define self-compassion, then I really don't see a difference between compassion for self and others. I define them the exact same way. I argue that self-compassion has the components of a sense of kindness, care, understanding for yourself versus judgment, a sense of common humanity versus feeling isolated and cut off from others, and then a sense of mindfulness, right, being aware of the suffering that's occurring versus over-identification, which, again, I'll just clarify this in one moment. Let's go through each one separately. Okay, so self-kindness versus self-judgment. Kindness is more than just hearts and flowers, okay? Kindness has a very active component to it. It means when you're kind to yourself, you really want to comfort yourself when you're suffering. You want to alleviate your suffering. You want to soothe yourself. Okay, it's a very active stance where I want to do whatever I can to help myself feel as good as possible in this moment. Okay. Common humanity, really framing one's own experience in light of the common human experience. It's very funny if I were to ask any of you, are you a human being? Are you a human being? Yes, of course. Is everyone else a human being? Yes, of course. Does everyone else suffer? Yes, of course. You would say that logically. But in the moment, when you just blew it at work, or you had someone reject you, or something really bad happens in your life, what happens non-rationally is that we get very egocentric. We feel like, why me? This somehow has happened to me. I'm the only one who's messed up. I'm the only one who's going through that difficult time. And we feel really cut off from others. It's as if somehow when things go wrong, that's abnormal. This is not supposed to be this way. Something has gone wrong. But is that the case? Has anything gone wrong? Is anything abnormal? No. You know, that's what life is. Life goes wrong. No one in here signed a contract before you got, born in this world saying, I would be perfect, my life would be perfect. And yet it's like, this is not the plan I signed up for. I'm pissed off about it, right? That's how we react. The problem with that, and there's a lot of problems with that, but one of the main things is when we feel isolated and cut off from others, physiologically, that's very frightening. If you think evolutionarily, one of the worst things that can happen to us is to be isolated from the group, because then we aren't safe. And it's interesting, this aspect of well-being, I don't think has been studied enough. This sense of, can we feel connected to others in our suffering, or do we feel isolated from others in our suffering? And I can tell you in the workshops I've conducted, especially the 8-week ones, at the end I asked people what they got out of this the most. Almost every single person says common humanity. I realize it's not just me. It's not just me who judges myself. It's not just me who suffers like this. Very important to remember that this is the human experience. This is how things are supposed to be. Okay, nothing has gone wrong. Yes, it's painful, but it's normal, it's natural. And then this is where the mindfulness comes in. You have to be aware of your suffering in order to give it compassion. So mindfulness allows you not only to notice your suffering, but very important, and we'll talk about this more, to be with your suffering as it is. We don't like to be around suffering. If we could just get rid of pain, we'd do it. And we have lots of psychological mechanisms to avoid that, again, which I'll be talking about in a little bit. So self-compassion says, wow, pain is occurring. Can I turn toward that? Can I be with that? And you actually need to do that to be able to give yourself the caring and support you need. All right? Now, some people do say, come on, you have to notice your suffering. Isn't it like blindingly obvious I'm suffering? But it's often really not. The pain caused by self-judgment, I think in some ways that's some of the worst pain all of us experience. A constant, niggly pain. I'm not good enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not this enough. I blew it. I'm this, I'm that. But often we are so lost in the role of self-critic that we don't really stop to realize, oh my God, this is really, really hurting. And in some ways it feels more comfortable to be the self-critic, because at least the self-critic isn't the person that messed up. The self-critic knows you messed up. The part of you that feels really, vulnerable and insecure and a failure. Often we don't give that side of the process as much attention. Okay, and then also very important when things go wrong in our lives. Very often we go straight into problem-solving mode. It's like, there's a problem. I don't want there to be a problem. Need to fix the problem. Immediately. And what happens is we go straight into problem-solving mode and don't stop to, again, turn towards the suffering and say, whew, this is really hard. This is difficult. I need a little care and compassion to get me through this. Then we really aren't at our best and our most psychologically stable when we go towards trying to fix that problem. Okay, so it's actually something you have to remind yourself to do before going straight into fixing problems. To just acknowledge and validate how difficult the situation is.
Does anyone have any thoughts about that video? Did it resonate? Did you like it? Yeah, good. And so going off of self-compassion is self-validation. And so self-validation is also really important. It's recognizing that there's a purpose behind your emotions and accepting those emotions that you're experiencing. Just as Kristen Neff was describing the video a bit, recognizing the way you're feeling is valid and that there's no wrong way to feel. And so this can be kind of done in 3 steps in a way. So the first step is to acknowledge it. So put a name on that emotion, acknowledge it, try not to judge it. So for example, I feel anxious. And I really like this chart because it kind of goes over what might be invalidating and what might be validating. And I also, sorry if you hear banging, my house is currently under construction. And it's been for a while, so I apologize. But in terms of invalidation versus self-validation, I feel like oftentimes we invalidate our own selves, saying like, oh, you know, I feel guilty, I shouldn't be feeling this way. But to counter that, it's really helpful for our own emotional wellness that we recognize and validate these emotions and know our own worth and our own self-worth. For example, if you're setting that boundary, knowing that it's okay to set that boundary and that it's important for yourself. And so step one was acknowledging, step two is allowing. And so reminding yourself that it's okay to experience any emotion. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to be angry. It's giving yourself permission to feel and telling yourself, you know, it's okay to feel the way I do. I'm allowed to experience this emotion. It doesn't mean that I'm behaving accordingly, because just because you feel an emotion doesn't mean that you have to necessarily act negatively on that emotion. Just because you feel angry, you know, doesn't mean that you have to lash out at someone. It's recognizing that the feelings will pass, but right now the emotion's there. And so the third step is understanding. And so we kind of talked about this a little bit, is creating a context for the emotion and trying to be objective and stating the facts. So kind of being your own like little detective investigator and being curious and asking yourselves what's been going on. Something that is done in treatment centers when someone has behavior. So for example, if they're in treatment for an eating disorder and they experience a slip, what they do is called a behavior chain analysis. And so basically it's just a therapeutic tool that kind of goes backwards in the days in a week and see kind of what happened, what led up to it, what made us maybe more vulnerable emotionally, and kind of what we could have stepped in to do to build ourselves up a little bit, to make sure that we don't judge ourselves too harshly. So understanding and kind of creating that context can be really helpful in that way. And grounding. And so grounding, I feel like, is being used, the word is being used more often, which I really like. And grounding is basically just kind of connecting to the ground, connecting to ourselves. And it can be very useful when our emotions become too much, and or you know, when our thoughts are racing, or when we don't feel present, when we feel like we're zoning off. And so what's really important with grounding, and it almost sounds obvious, but it's connecting to the ground. And so I'm someone that crosses my legs like all the time. It's pretty much my default. But when I'm, you know, feeling discombobulated or whatever, and I need to focus on grounding, the first thing I'll do is I'll put my feet on the ground and feel the floor and feel the earth if I'm outside. And this connection to the earth is just very, it's fundamentally what grounding is really about, like getting yourself situated, and as well connecting to breathing. And so diaphragmatic breathing is just basically a fancy way of saying you're kind of breathing with your stomach and your diaphragm. And so you want to make sure that when you are inhaling, your stomach is kind of sticking out as well. And there's some great videos on YouTube if you search up diaphragmatic breathing. And then progressive muscle relaxation is a tool that basically you can go from head to toe, toe to head. You could do whatever muscle group you'd like, but it just basically encompasses tensing and then relaxing your muscles. So whether that's like, you know, flexing your feet really, really hard and then letting them go, and then focusing on them relaxing. And that can be really helpful, especially if you're having difficulty falling asleep. Thoughts are racing. It just kind of allows you to get more in touch with your body. And it's a way of kind of relaxing and grounding. And another thing that could be helpful, especially if someone is maybe kind of going in a panic, like, I don't want to use the word spiraling, but like kind of unable to get their thoughts together, this can be something really helpful. Or if someone's like having a dissociative episode or experiencing a flashback or a memory or an intrusive thought. So it just basically is as it says. So focusing on 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, and you could always like switch it up as you can see. And so, you know, if you're kind of feeling overwhelmed, you could just go, okay, what are 5 things I see? Okay, I see my hand cream, I see a pen, I see a mask. Just kind of those things help bring your awareness to what's going on around you, and can also be like a little brain distraction in a way. And so riding the waves of emotion is a DBT skill. So it's like dialectical behavioral therapy skill. And it's basically when you are feeling these really heavy emotions, is just riding the wave of the emotions, staying with the emotions, giving it space, naming it, validating it, and noticing it without judgment, and knowing that the feeling will pass. All feelings do. Um, and so, you know, you experience that really heavy emotion, and afterwards, there's that experience of like catharticness, feeling calm. You know, you did it, and so that's kind of the open heart state after you ride the wave. There's like a calm after the wave breaks, and sometimes we get a clear idea of how to address the situation, or we have perspective. And that this can also help us feel like we've accomplished something and succeeded. And this feeling should be fostered and recognized, because it can help people feel like they have more control over their emotions. And so, therefore, they would feel their emotions or fear their emotions less and less. Another quote by the amazing Kristen Neff. It says, painful feelings are, by their very nature, temporary. They will weaken over time as long as we don't prolong or amplify them through resistance or avoidance. The only way to eventually free ourselves from debilitating pain, therefore, is to be with it as it is. The only way out is through. And I really like this quote. I also really like feel the fear, do it anyways as a quote, because ultimately the only way out is through. If you're going to push down those emotions and suppress them, it's they don't just disappear. They're still going to be there, and they need to be kind of expressed in a healthy way, and that's really helps emotional functioning. And so I feel like we've all heard of the typical coping strategies, you know, journal, meditate, go for a walk, take a bath, and you know, they can definitely be helpful. They're, you know, commonly talked about for a reason, but I have always been really interested in finding like more unconventional ways to address distress that maybe folks haven't heard of or seem kind of weird, but they do work some for uh, different people. So screaming into a jar or yelling as loud as you can, it can be a really healthy way of expressing emotions like frustration. um, Obviously, you know, making sure you're in a good space, making sure it's not like 7 a.m. and your child is screaming at the top of their lungs. But it can be a way of kind of getting that catharsis. Another thing is a minute-long dance break. So at least a verse and a chorus of just kind of dancing it out and enjoying yourself, and just taking that little break can really boost your mood, cause endorphins. Another thing is if someone is kind of spiraling with intrusive thoughts, or panicking, a way of helping is by reciting. And so for number savvy people or people that hate numbers, it might be a good idea to ask someone to count backwards from 100 by 7, because it's really challenging to do. You have to think about it. And so that thinking kind of gets your brain to snap out almost of those negative feelings. Um, or, you know, if someone really doesn't like numbers, saying the alphabet backwards, it causes them to have to switch gears in their brain and start focusing on listing and naming. And another thing is using something that someone would know. So for example, if someone knows like the US states and it's more like reciting, that might be a bit helpful. But if someone's like I don't know, any of the states, and then it would become frustrating for them to try and think of it. It might not be a good choice to use that. Another way of addressing distress is writing those thoughts out, writing those thoughts that your brain's having that are all negative, ripping them up. Maybe for older children, if they are supervised, potentially burning them can be really cathartic, and but obviously, you know, fire hazard and all that. Another way is the butterfly hug or monkey tap. And so I'm going to turn on my camera to demonstrate this. My camera's off just because my whole family is working from home, and so the Wi-Fi is not the best. But hello, this is me. And so a butterfly hug is kind of tapping your arms while hugging yourself. And this can sometimes really help those emotions, or even just, you know, giving yourself a big hug and then tapping. It causes you to focus on something and can be really helpful as well. Another way is digging a pencil into a notebook until it tears through the pages. Obviously, recommend getting a cheap notebook from the dollar store, so it isn't a financial issue of this, if it is a helpful coping strategy. Or for younger children, maybe giving their stuffed animals a makeover. And so these are some TikToks, but I really like the content. It's just basically about coping strategies. So I hope you enjoy.
Hey, thank you for joining me for another Martin Minute. Today I'm talking about coping exercises. The reason why I think it's important to have so many different coping skills is because at one point in time, something may work and something may not work, especially if you're dealing with more stress. So I like to think about it, what mode you're in. M is mindfulness. That is yoga. That is meditation. That is also grounding exercises. O is opposite action. It means I want you to do the exact opposite of what you feel like during times of stress. If you're depressed and you crawl in bed, get your behind out that bed, walk out that door, and move around. A is affect identification. That's talking about your feelings, taking the time to journal, possibly to write down why you're feeling this way, what contributed to it, all of that. D is distractors. That can be coloring, that can be exercise, that could be going for a walk, that could be listening to some music and like banging out and singing. That is a good one. S is support system. That could be contacting a friend, family member, colleague, anyone who you feel as though can help you and can help you cope. It's good to have a lot of exercises in your mental health toolbox, because something may not work, and that doesn't mean you're going to stop and go back into that negative mood. That means you're going to choose something else. Rotate and try something else.
So I really love her. She's on TikTok, Raquel Martin, PhD, if you are interested in seeing more of her. Obviously, that was really fast because she had to do it in under a minute, but hopefully it was
Hey, thank you for joining me for another Martin Minute. Today I'm talking.
And there's one more.
Hi everyone, welcome to another Martin Minute. Today we're doing even more coping skills because I got them for you, but this time, what's the difference? We're going to differentiate them according to our senses. So let's start. So with touch, that can be something as simple as a stuffed animal, petting an animal that you actually have there with you, or even some sensory aspect of like massaging your hands, just to calm yourself down. Then we have scent. That can be candles, that can be room sprays, that can be aromatherapy diffusers, that can even just be hand lotion, anything that helps to calm you down. Then we have sight. That can be watching a happy video, watching a meme, looking at pictures of yourself when you were in a time of joy. It can also even be just looking at something like a snow globe or a lava lamp, if they even still make those. We have hearing, of course, so that can be listening to music. That can be listening to meditation tapes. That can also just be listening to calming sounds like water running or things of that nature. And then we have taste. That can be gum, that can be bits of candy, that can be chocolate, that can even just be tea. Hi, everyone.
All right, and now if Nicole is here. Then...
I am. Sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. Did you want me to present this part too?
I should be fine to do so. Let me just pull it up. Hi, everybody. My apologies for my tardiness this morning. I will pull it up. Oops. You had a video?
Yes.
Do you want to play the video while I pull up the slides?
Sure.
All right, sounds good.
Hello, my name is Devon Robinson, and today I will be discussing how spanking has perpetuated the slave mentality in the African American community. Thank you.
Episode of Blackish. ABC's Marcy Abacampo examined the arguments.
Where are you, Jack? On ABC's Blackish Wednesday night, a common parenting predicament.
When we get home, your father is going to spank you.
To spank or not to spank. Characters Dre and his wife Bo disagreeing on whether or not their misbehaving son should meet the belt.
If you want to spank him so bad, why don't you do it yourself?
Because you're the spanker, Dre.
Even taking the question to coworkers.
Who thinks they were better off being spanked?
Oh, amen.
While this isn't real, for many the dilemma is. The episode sparking a conversation online. One viewer tweeting, "No spanking in my house." Another posting, "Personally, I'm glad I got spankings."
It's actually really
that she hit. But before we ask those questions, we have to ask, where did this form of punishment so common in the African American community come from? Like myself, many African American children grow up in predominantly Black environments, which can create a perception that spanking is just a commonly used form by angry Black mothers, when in fact it really isn't. According to Parents Magazine, 4 out of 5 parents still spank their children as a form of punishment. The question of punishment has always been a controversial matter when it comes to parenting, because people have the right to have a child, thus they have a right to discipline them as they may. The question of when the inflicted punishment goes beyond the committed crime has always been a balance, not only in parents but for the Department of Justice themselves. Often we view punishment as a natural reaction when someone commits a wrong. But some punishments can give lasting mental and physical damages that we can't even see. One of the core reasons we utilize the use of punishment is because punishment brings control. Ultimately, the punishments of present society exist as a means to control and regulate an individual's behavior. When a man strikes his male or female slave with a rod so hard that the slave dies under his hand, he shall be punished. If, however, the slave survives for 1 day or 2, he is not to be punished, since the slave is in his own property. Now that is a selection from Exodus 21, verses 20 through 21. Many slave masters back in the day lived by this scripture as a justification for their practices on slaves and whipping them. Similarly, many slave mothers used the technique of whipping or spanking not as a means of control or divine right, but often to protect their child, their slave child, from being brutally hit by the slave master. Now, if a slave master viewed a mother punishing her child, they would have looked at the slave as more obedient. Therefore, whipping and hitting a child as a form of discipline often was a visual way of slaves showing the slave master that they had what it takes to discipline their child. Study after study shows us that children who experience physical abuse develop detrimental effects to their brain, including slow cognitive development and increased likelihood to addictive, depressive, and criminal behavior. Now, not only do these methods perpetuate the wretched methods used on slaves by white slave masters, these practices are destructive as a people and destructive to our children, which we hope one day will make this world a better place and a better environment. Thank you.
So we can skip these ones. We talked about it.
So hi everyone. We're going to talk about technology and devices. They are a vital part of our lives, but they are also intrusive and addictive. To help you navigate devices for use with your children, role model digital behaviors. So that means is setting your phone down during meals and something like that. Set realistic and effective boundaries. See your role as mentor, not as monitor. This can help children, specifically as they seek more independence and control in their lives. And parental settings just taken advantage. So the chat room, monitor direct messages until a certain age. Despite, sorry, one second. Despite parental controls, some children may find a way to go around them. Some platform still allows chat. For example, gaming platforms such as Roblox and Minecraft. And actually, this happens in the morning when I was leaving from my home, and my younger son, who's 7, he was watching something, and I just heard it, and it was like, not appropriate. And the guy was like sending him a message or something as well, and he's like, "Oh, what's your age?" and stuff like that. So I'm like, "Who are you talking to?" And he's like, "I don't know. He's a friend of mine," and he doesn't even know the guy. So just something like that. All these games have the platform that they can chat to each other. So the devices use social media is not a reality. Um, Girls can be more vulnerable, but boys also are heavily influenced by media and images, and may think that most people look flawless in real life, especially if their timeline is full of famous people and influencers that they have an ideal body. Emphasize that images can be edited and often show the best side of someone. So like this photo of Dana Mercer, who is a really good body neutral and authentic person to follow, did not change in the 2 photos. The only thing that's different is poses and lighting and editing. So that's the actual reality of looking like a model every time. So becoming a critical consumer. So some things to go over with children around devices use might be looking at posts and helping them identify, just ask them the questions like, what is the underlying messages of the post? And do I like or agree with it? And if they are at the age where they're posting their own content, spark that critical lens by asking them, you know, what point am I trying to get across with this post? Does my post acknowledge my perspective without putting others down? Then chatting with kids about technology. The best way to protect children online is to talk to them. Create an open and honest environment. Communicate your values and be patient. So now switching gears a bit, but I think vicarious trauma and burnout is really important to talk about, especially as we've over a year into the pandemic with really no end in sight in Ontario, at least. So vicarious traumas is compassion fatigue, cost of caring too much and too often. Secondary trauma calls like from repetitive exposure to others' trauma. Helpers may experience similar symptoms like a muscle that gets fatigued and drained. So the exposure would be secondary stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout would be gas tank gets drained. And this is more detail of the trauma. So vicarious impact versus vicarious growth. This chart is a nice visual of burnout. and vicarious trauma. Read out some parts. Sorry, can't. So when we are impacted by vicarious trauma, our physical responses, purpose, values, beliefs, and emotional meanings can all be impacted. At the same time, overcoming and preserving through this can result in vicarious growth, including increased wonder and joy, greater connection with others, increased compassion and hope. So the next one is addressing vicarious trauma awareness. Recognize warning signs and red, yellow flags. Practice paying attention to body signals. And so you can kind of see the difference between the three. Either of them may occur. So it is important to know what it looks like so that you can identify it if you feel like it's maybe happening in your life. So like all of these. And so looking just in this graphic, just looking at the right side at relaxation, social support, spend time celebrating wins, and trust the process. I hand it to Taylor.
Thank you, Sophia. So the last section that we are going to be talking about today is Advocacy 101. And so first we'll start by watching a quick video. And I'm really hoping that this works, but I might have to stop sharing. And okay. Can everyone see my screen is global news? Perfect.
Yeah.
We would all bathe in the same like water, but like so my oldest sister would go first, and then my middle sister, and then I was last. So the time I had to go bathe, the water's like brown.
For 21-year-old Faith Harding, memories from her childhood in Durham's welfare system are painful to confront.
I was getting chased, and they chased me out onto the highway and then left me there.
That's awful. I am so sorry, Faith. Bullying at school and severe neglect at home. It's what Harding and her two sisters faced on a daily basis for years. Beginning at age 5, Harding jumped from one foster family to another, with each household predominantly white and unable to take proper care of Black children.
For our hair, we can't just go to bed with like wet hair every night, right? And that's what they do. So, and I think that's how we call lace, all three of us.
Eventually, the girls were placed in a stable Black home where they stayed until aging out of care. But Harding is sharing her story in the hopes that things will change for Black children who often face alarming disparities and are overrepresented in the system.
We recognize that our services to racialized people, to Black people, to Indigenous people has not been what it should be, and that we have approached this work through an institutional lens of systemic bias.
The CAS says 15% of children in the system are Black. But the issue spans beyond the region. The province has been working to address these disparities by providing funding to agencies to better support kin and cultural matching.
Changing that system and that way of thinking to bring the supports together in the community and really collaborate all the support services to help families, to keep families together.
Well, we appreciate what you've done.
Harding is also hoping she can do her part to transform the system as she studies mental health and addictions in honor of her late sister.
She had like a lot of mental health issues. Eventually to the point where, I'm not saying she was addicted to anything, but she ended up taking some things to cope with her life, which was pretty hard. I got into this field, so maybe I can help other families like my own.
Brittany Rosen, Global News.
Oh my God. Sorry. So does anyone want to share any thoughts that they had about the video? I know it was really powerful for me, and especially in the local context of Durham. And this video is from September 2020, I believe. So it's pretty recent. Your voice matters, and it's important to recognize that you can make a really big difference. And stories and sharing experiences are incredible tools that can be used to create concrete change. And policymakers, excuse me, they can't fix what they don't know about. And so when looking at, how do I advocate? Who do I advocate to? Who has the power to make the changes that you seek? So it's important to ask yourself, like, who is already working on our issues? Where are the advocates most needed? And so when I was doing some research, there's an organization called Until the Last Child that focuses on foster families in Canada. Obviously, Durham Children's Aid Society and the Ontario Association of Children's Aid Societies is another great place to advocate, as they have power, they have a agency to kind of create and enact policies that make change and support various pilot projects, stuff like that. And so there's a lot of power in a personal story. And just as we saw with the global news video, it's incredibly powerful just sharing stories, and especially in combining stories and experiences with that data in numbers, to see who's been underserved, can really make a big difference. And so when you're thinking, like, how do I get to advocate? What do I even want to advocate for? Then you can kind of identify your goals and decide what message relates to that goal. And so, for example, if you were really struggling to like financially, or you recognize that a lot of folks are struggling financially, it might be developing talking points like children who face challenges are being raised in families, but these families need support to ensure that they can meet the needs of children and youth. And so kind of framing it in terms of what the needs are and what the goal is. And so identifying storytellers, so solicit those stories. So find constituents of the policymakers that you're seeking to influence, ask for recommendations, and choose one or a few people whose stories best convey the messages and diversities of the issue. And so that can really help ensure that policymakers are aware of what's going on and they're able to perpetuate that voice. And so for messaging, it's very helpful to keep messaging simple, be positive and strengths-based, and use first-person language like I, we, she, he, they, and to leave them with a possible solution. And another way of advocating is to use social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. I feel like, especially as TikTok has gotten larger and larger, there's a lot of advocacy work going on, a lot of awareness being kind of showcased, and it's a really good platform to be able to reach a lot of different people. And another thing is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all of these places that do use hashtags. You can use a hashtag to gain momentum and to help spread the word. And so this is not a local example, but this is an example of how you might kind of format and organize recommendations and such. And so as we can see, this has the challenge area, the challenges, and then potential solutions that foster parents can get behind and have created and suggest from their own lived experience, because that lived experience is really, really vital and really important. And then on that note, there are a couple research studies that I wanted to just make you aware of, because I think it really is important that to share your experiences as people that are going through. And so this one is sharing your experiences as a resource parent during the pandemic. So if you are an active resource parent in Ontario, then you can use an online or do this online survey that takes, about half an hour, which is a big chunk of time. But it definitely really helps make the higher kind of institutions aware of the issues that are going on. It's a great way to share your voice. So there's another research study I wanted to make you aware of as well. And both of these, the information can be found at fosterparentsociety.org. And then this is another one through Brock University that is looking for foster parents to provide feedback on the well-being during COVID. And so again, it is like a survey that will take, half an hour to 45 minutes. And there's also an interview process, but it can be a really good way of sharing your challenges and possibly providing those suggestions. And yeah, and that is all for today's presentation. If anyone has any questions or comments.